Hey, everybody. Thanks for coming. Good to see you all here. My name is Dan Tao. I'm the head of engineering for DevOps products at Atlassian.
And I'm Preeti Kota. I'm the head of engineering for Compass at Atlassian. Hopefully you're having a great time at Unleash, and we're really happy to see you here today.
So today we're going to be talking comprehensive scorecards for DevOps. We're going to tell you how to go beyond DORA metrics to help your engineering teams perform at their best. So we're going to start with a little story time. I want you all to meet Bob. Bob is an engineering manager. He really has his heart in the right place. He wants to help his team become the best engineering team they can be. And Bob has learned about DORA metrics. For those who don't know, DORA metrics were a set of metrics introduced 10 years ago by Google to help DevOps teams measure their practices. They include cycle time, which is the time it takes from a change to go from in progress all the way to customers. Deployment frequency, which is how frequently you're getting your changes out to production. Change failure rate, what percentage of your changes cause problems, whether they be bugs or incidents. And lastly, mean time to resolve. When you do have an issue, a customer-facing issue, how long does it take to recover from that? Bob discovered that the team was doing weekly releases, and so for Bob, that set off a light bulb in his head that one of the DORA metrics, deployment frequency, is used to measure how effective my team is. If we're only doing a release every week, then that's an opportunity to improve by moving my deployment frequency up. Let's start changing to daily releases so that our deployment frequency will improve. And sure enough, after a month, Bob found that deployment frequency was up 700%. But something he noticed that seemed a little not quite right, they started tracking throughput in addition to deployment frequency, meaning what are the actual number of changes we're getting out every week? And it had gone down. Even though deployment frequency was up, the actual amount of changes the team was able to deliver had gone down. And what's worse, the devs were actually miserable on the team. So something was clearly going wrong. It turned out that the team's release process was very costly and fragile, and that's why they were only doing it once a week, because it was so painful to do. If they did it every day, it would start taking up all of their time. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened when he moved to daily releases. So this brings us to a little law called Goodhart's Law. This says that once a metric becomes a goal, it ceases to be a good metric. The best way I can describe this is with an analogy. We're all familiar with how school systems exist to educate children, but it can be difficult to know how well are they doing at educating those children. So that's where standardized testing comes in. The problem with standardized testing, of course, is while the idea is to see how much students are learning by seeing how the test scores go at the school, then this creates an incentive for schools to start just teaching kids exactly how to do well on the tests. This is known as teaching to the test. And then they lose sight of the actual goal of educating the kids. So Bob made the mistake of sort of teaching to the test, treating deployment frequency as its own goal, as if test scores were a goal in and of themselves, when in fact deployment frequency is meant to measure how effective a team is doing, and not a number you can just move up and guarantee that your team's going to be doing better. So again, Bob's mistake was viewing deployment frequency as an end rather than a means. The same way test scores are meant to provide some visibility into how well schools are doing at educating kids, deployment frequency is meant to provide some visibility into how effective your team is doing, and not something you should strive to move for its own sake. Bear with us, everyone. These slides are a little different from what we were expecting. So there's going to be a little bit of improv going on here, which is okay.
Yeah, so just imagine that you have better graphics as you look at this slide deck, and then we will post an updated version when the talk goes online. So let's take it from here, right? So Dan talked to you about Bob, and if you're like me, you're probably feeling sorry for Bob and his team at this point. There's a much better way to do this. And let's look at what Raul did. So in contrast to Bob, Raul is actually a real engineering manager on one of our teams, and he is awesome. So I will caveat this story by telling you that this is inspired from what Raul did. So this definitely has, it's inspired by the truth, but the data that you see is not real. So just giving you that caveat before we talk about what Raul did. So Raul, like Bob, also learned about DORA metrics, and he understood the value of having a high deployment frequency. You want to make sure that your teams are pushing out changes to your customers and doing this really efficiently. So let's look at how Raul went about this. So the first thing that Raul did was talk to his team. So he started with the qualitative, right? At the end of the day, your teams know exactly what's going on. Just ask them and they'll tell you where the problem lies. And so that's what Raul did. And when he spoke to his team, he learned that devs were really scared of deploying. This is absolutely not what you want your teams to be like, right? You don't want to be afraid of deployments. So he dug deeper. He wanted to figure out why devs were scared of deployments. So two important factors emerged when he looked into this. One was, the reason I'm looking back at my slides is because this does not look like the latest version. So deployments were taking way too long. That was one of the problems that they observed. And the second thing that his team told him was that the deployment failure rate was super high. So you can imagine that these two things together contributed to why devs were so afraid to deploy their changes. So the first thing he did was started with tracking these specific custom metrics. If you were at Matt's keynote today, you learned about Compass, our new developer experience platform. And that's exactly what Raul used to track deployment duration and deployment failure rate. So his team invested time in making deployments faster and more stable. As you can imagine, they tracked their work in Jira, and that's how they identified or tracked what they needed to do to solve these problems. The deployments got faster, the deployment duration went down, change failure rate went down, and as you might imagine, this also resulted in deployment frequency going up. So what you'll observe here is that Raul did not focus on deployment frequency, which is the DORA metric, as his goal. Instead, he identified what was contributing to a poor deployment frequency and fixed those problems instead. And he also observed that throughput was not impacted in the way in which he approached this. And if you remember Bob's case, you'll remember that devs were really unhappy, even though the DORA metric looked great. In Raul's case, his team was really happy. Developer satisfaction actually increased by the time they were done with this project. And so let's recap. In Bob's case, the problem that Bob ran into was that he just focused on deployment frequency as the goal. Like Dan was talking about, you apply Goodhart's law to it, and then once you're just focused on deployment frequency, you forget why you need to focus on that. And engineering efficiency, developer productivity, developer joy, whatever you choose to call it, this is an area of active research. We heard about DORA metrics today. There's also the SPACE framework. You're probably reading about flow states and friction, and there's so many different things to take inspiration from. But what really matters is that you need to figure out what's unique about your organization. Use these metrics or use all of these definitions as inspiration. Talk to your teams. Really pair qualitative with quantitative to understand exactly what your team's problems are, and then customize a solution based on your team's individual needs. And so that's exactly what Raul did, and his story was much better.
Let's see what the next slide is. Okay, this is roughly what I wanted it to be. Okay, let's encapsulate these three things. I'm going to somewhat recap what Preeti said, but we think of sort of Bob's mistakes in three broad themes. One is treating DORA metrics as one size fits all. Like, these 4 metrics tell you everything you need to know. You don't need any additional signals. The truth is every organization is unique. The second is overlooking the qualitative. So Bob, if you think back to the stories, didn't actually talk to his team to understand why deployments were only being done once a week. He just leaped ahead to the decision to, we're going to move to daily releases. And by overlooking those qualitative signals, Bob was missing, basically a huge part of the big picture. And finally, it was, as we've sort of hammered home, hopefully by now, treating metrics as a goal in and of themselves. The important thing is to set goals that actually matter. None of the DORA metrics matter on their own. Your cycle time is not an end in and of itself. Deployment frequency is not an end in and of itself. All of these metrics are meant to sort of provide some sort of baseline picture for you to then go dig deeper and understand what is affecting your teams and what would help unblock them. So this brings us to what we think of as the virtuous cycle of DevOps. There's supposed to be 3 things here. I wonder if the next one, there it is. There's the third one. So we start with diagnosis. Diagnosis is where you start with a combination of quantitative and qualitative. So in the case of DORA, those are a great starting point. You want to understand what those metrics are to inform your view of the world, but you want to pair that with the qualitative feedback from the team who can tell you sort of where the real pain points are that you can dig into deeper. Once you get that diagnosis, those insights from collecting the qualitative and quantitative, you move on to action. You create, an action plan. You need to actually put people on some tasks to make some improvements. In the case of Raul, he needed engineers to actually work on making the deployments faster and making them more stable. That means troubleshooting. Why are the build times so long? What is causing the failures? How can we integrate, retries and improve the resilience of the system to the point where we can get that success rate higher and higher and closer to 100%. And then finally, continuous validation. The reason this is a cycle, you can't just do it once and you're done. You have to treat it as an iterative, repeatable process. A big key here is you go back to diagnosis. You're not just looking at the metrics moving to validate that you're making improvements. You can't ignore the qualitative. It could be possible, and in fact probably did happen in reality, that as Raul's team was making improvements to deployments, there were probably other things they were doing that the devs weren't actually enjoying or were having sort of counterproductive effects. And so you need to continue gathering qualitative data as you go through this cycle to make adjustments as necessary. So at Atlassian, what we do is we send out monthly surveys to all of our developers to start getting a pulse on how their work is getting done. What are the things that they feel are blocking them? What are the things they feel are going well? We ask them things like, how much time are you spending on dependency management, upgrading libraries, things like that. How much time do you spend consulting documentation? Can you find the documentation you need? Does it have all the information you're looking for? Is it up to date? Is it actually accurate? And overall, just what is your level of satisfaction being a developer at Atlassian? These things give the whole company a monthly signal on all of the things we care about when it comes to that qualitative input I'm talking about for the diagnosis piece. Then, baked into our own tools are many of those key metrics that form the quantitative part of the picture. This here is from Jira Service Management. For teams that are focused on the operational side of things, we offer DORA metrics such as mean time to resolution right out of the box, as well as other metrics that you might want to watch when it comes to dealing with customer-facing incidents, dealing with the reliability and maturity of your services. Here's an image of Jira software, where we also incorporate some of those metrics that you can use. We've got deployment frequency, as well as cycle time, for teams who want to focus on, if velocity, the rate at which they're being able to build new features and new capabilities in their products is their primary concern. Here, again, DORA metrics provide a great baseline that you can use as the quantitative starting point that you then pair with qualitative feedback from your teams. And last but certainly not least, Compass, Atlassian's product that's just gone GA in the past couple months, is really a product focused on the dev teams themselves and the components that they own. Compass offers all of the DORA metrics out of the box, but it even goes a layer further and gives you the ability to define custom metrics and custom scorecards based on those signals that you've identified through that virtuous cycle that we talked about. And so in Raul's case, Raul, in a alternate reality, we had a slide that showed this, but he was able to define a deployment health scorecard, which showed not just deployment frequency, the DORA metric, but those other metrics we talked about, deployment duration and deployment success rate, as key metrics that were relevant for his team specifically based on the insights he had gained from talking to them. And so what's so powerful about Compass is not just that you can see, perform that diagnosis step and see the metrics that you've put in place and the custom scorecards you've put in place. You can then turn them into actions by creating Jira issues directly from Compass. And those issues can be things like addressing operational issues, addressing reliability, availability issues, improving documentation, any of those things that could address the root causes of the pain points your teams are experiencing. And then in Jira, when you see those issues, they will be linked back to the Compass components, as well as the scorecards that they came from. All right, Preeti, back to you.
So we talked about diagnosis, we talked about action. So now let's talk about continuous validation. So who here has fixed a problem, let's say with your build system, and it's never had a problem ever again? See, exactly, right? That's not reality. So what you want is the ability to continuously keep track of the investments that you've made and know when things go off track, because absolutely, things will go off track, and that's why it's a cycle and not a one-time fix. So how do you do this? Compass lets you create scorecards so you can keep on track of how the changes that you've made are performing. So in Raul's case, he created a DevOps health scorecard, and he tracked the 3 key metrics that we talked about: deployment duration, deployment failure rate, and deployment frequency. By looking at all of these metrics together with that single scorecard, you can easily see how if one of them goes off track, that's going to influence the others. And like Dan said, when you see this happening, automatically just go create a Jira issue right from there so it shows up in your backlog. It really removes the friction from your teams in making sure you're staying on top of these investments that you've already made. We are also working on bringing you these insights and making it better from right within Jira. Today, when you go into Jira, you will be able to see your Compass components and link them with your Jira issues. We continue to improve this experience, and you'll be able to see your scorecards show up within Jira. This helps you bring your cross-craft teams along with you and make sure that everybody has access to this key information. We talked about Raul and Bob, and we talked about deployment frequency as the key DORA metric that we explored in this journey. But that's not all. There are a number of other DORA metrics that are equally important. So let's look at a couple more. So in this example, let's look at mean time to response. This is a really critical metric for any DevOps team, mean time to resolution in this case. This really tracks how long it takes from the time a customer reports an incident, let's say it's an outage for the customer, to the time that things are back to normal for them, right? Like how long does it take for you to resolve that? As you can imagine, this is a number where you want this to be really low, and you want your teams to have a high bar here. Let's say that your MTTR is not that great. What do? So let's apply that virtuous cycle here. You want to spend time understanding why your MTTR is low. Some common examples, right? Maybe your runbooks are stale, and your incident response team, like your DevOps engineer, is looking at these runbooks, and therefore it takes a really long time for them to figure out what's happening. An active incident is absolutely not the time that you want to discover that your runbooks are stale. We talked about how engineering today is different from what it was 10 years ago. There are a number of services that teams own, and I don't think it's possible anymore for me to know that I have an upstream dependency, and there's no way I know off the top of my head who owns that. This is the cognitive overload that really comes to impact you during an active incident. So you want to bring this down for your teams. What do you do about this? A great way to address this would be to set up runbook validation SLAs. You really want to be proactive when it comes to this. You want to make sure your teams are going and looking at their runbooks and validating accuracy of those runbooks. When you use Compass, you want to make sure that all of your software components are tracked in Compass, and that things like your owning team or the channel or Slack channel in our case that you use to communicate the team, all of this is updated. That really reduces the cognitive load when it comes to incidents. So how do you continuously validate this? No surprise, Compass provides you the ability to create scorecards to keep track of this. So in this case, I've shown you an example of an operations scorecard where you can track your MTTR, you can check if your component has an owner, and you can define your runbook validation SLA. And then if you haven't validated your runbook, let's say it's been 6 months, that scorecard is going to go red, and you'll know right away that there's something that you need to address when it comes to operations. Let's pick another DORA metric, and let's talk about cycle time. So in this case, we define cycle time as the amount of time it takes for an engineer to start working on a PR to the time that it actually gets merged to production. This is a pretty complex process, right? There's a lot of phases involved here. You know, the author is coming up with a solution, publishing a PR for review. They're waiting for feedback from reviewers. Once they have all the approvals, then they're merging it to production. There's many different places where things can go wrong and impact your cycle time. So let's say that your PR cycle time is really long and you want to address it. What are some of the problems that you might discover in your diagnosis phase? Maybe the wait time is the problem. Authors are waiting for too long for reviewers to give them feedback, or the other way around. Reviewers are waiting too long for authors to respond to their feedback. So that's a metric that you want to track. Another problem that we see all too often, although we don't want to see it, is flaky tests. And you can imagine, you really don't want your development team saying, well, I had all of my reviews, but I wasn't able to push it to prod because the tests failed. I'm going to rerun it. So flaky tests are a problem. So these are great things to track when it comes to improving your cycle time. Again, your action here could be to have SLAs around your PR review times, and then you want to address your test flakiness. And you want to validate this continuously. You want a scorecard which will track how long your devs spend waiting. You want a scorecard that tells you how flaky your tests are. And in fact, these are problems that we run into often at Atlassian, and we are working on putting this into our product so you have these easily available to you. So let's recap. We talked about the virtuous cycle of DevOps. We talked about how you go from diagnosis to action to continuous validation, and then you rinse and repeat. And the one thing that we haven't talked about is continuous learning. At Atlassian, these are some of the problems that we are solving for our own engineering teams. We are still learning as we go. And what you will see is that our learnings make their way into our products. We showed you how you can go beyond DORA metrics and use comprehensive scorecards for your own teams. We showed you how we use Atlassian products to make this happen. At the end of the day, the learnings that we've discovered along this journey are applicable regardless of what tool suite you use. And we hope you had some good takeaways from this session. Like Dan mentioned, Compass just went GA. We have a booth on the floor, so come talk to us if you have any questions at the booth. Awesome, wonderful. Thank you for coming. We hope you had a great first day at Unleash. And I look forward to chatting with many of you.
Thanks, everyone.